This is Bone Chillers to disturb your dreams. Dare to join us? Click subscribe, ring the bell. But remember, we cannot guarantee your safety from the nightmares that await. Prepare to be thrilled, chilled, and filled with a sense of dread you'll find nowhere else. Welcome to the darkness. We've been waiting.
It was in my house. I had always been sensitive to sounds, especially at night. The world turned into an orchestra of whispers and muffled movements once the sun set, each nocturnal note reaching my ears with impeccable clarity. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of the wind, it all seemed amplified, as if I had been granted the ears of a nocturnal predator. However, on that particular night, there was a sound that stood out from the rest, a raspy, grating noise like sandpaper rubbing against wood. At first I thought it was a figment of my imagination, but as it persisted I couldn't help but rise from my bed to investigate. Tiptoeing across the wooden floor of my bedroom, I tried to determine the source of the sound. The house was bathed in a faint glow from the moonlight, making the once familiar environment seem eerily unfamiliar, but nothing could have prepared me for the sight that awaited me. As I peeked around the corner of the hallway, my eyes caught a chilling sight. Long skeletal fingers, pale and luminescent, were slowly dragging along the walls, leaving a faint trace of phosphorescent light in their wake. The source of the raspy noise was evident now. It was the creature's breath. The thing appeared humanoid, but its limbs were grotesquely elongated, and its skin stretched taut over its emaciated frame. Its face was the most unsettling. Hollow eyes that held no light or life stared back at me, their depths seemingly endless. A gaping mouth filled with irregular teeth lay open, the raspy breath emanating from within. Panic took over. In that split second, I felt as if I had been yanked out of the reality I knew. This couldn't be real. Such horrors were meant for fictional tales, not my cozy suburban home. But the creature, which I instinctively recognized as the rake from countless urban legends, was as real as the fear gripping my heart. I took a step back, my foot betraying me with a creak. The rake's head turned toward the noise, its eyes now fixated on mine. Time seemed to stretch infinitely in that moment before it lurched toward me. Adrenaline surged, and I turned on my heels, darting through my house, desperately seeking refuge. The once comforting walls of my home had transformed into a haunting maze. Shadows twisted and turned, making familiar items appear grotesque in the pale moonlight. The grandfather clock, which had always stood benignly in the corner, now seemed to be a sentinel for the rake, its pendulum swinging with malicious intent. My cherished family photos stared down with morphed, sinister faces, their smiles contorted into wicked sneers. With each passing second, the distance between me and the rake diminished. Its raspy breath seemed to surround me, echoing in my ears with a predatory promise. I raced into the living room, the large sliding glass door leading to the backyard becoming my target. If I could make it outside, perhaps I could find a hiding spot or run to a neighbor's house. But as I neared the door, a chilling realization hit me. The door was locked. In my haste, my hands fumbled with the lock, the rake's footsteps growing closer with each passing second. The rasping breath was now so loud it threatened to drown out my own panicked heartbeats. Summoning every ounce of strength, I managed to slide the door open, but not before those elongated fingers reached out, grazing my back. The touch was ice cold, sending a numbing sensation coursing through me. But I didn't stop. With the night air biting at my face, I dashed across my backyard, vaulting over the fence. The woods behind my house seemed inviting now, a place to hide, a place to lose the creature. I didn't know how long I ran or how far. The trees became a blur as my sole focus was to escape the nightmare. Eventually exhaustion overcame me, and I found a dense thicket to take cover. The woods were silent, save for the steady rhythm of my heart. Minutes turned to hours as I waited, hoping the creature had lost my trail. It was only when dawn broke, casting its golden hue over the world, did I dare move. Making my way back to my home, I found the sliding door still open, a silent testament to the previous night's terror. No one believed my tale. They said it was just a night terror, a vivid dream induced by stress. But the faint scratch marks on my back, which seemed to glow ever so faintly in the dark, told a different story. And every night, as silence blankets the world, I listen for that raspy breath, hoping against hope that it was just a one-time encounter. But deep down, I know that once you've heard the sounds in the silence, they never truly go away.
the gifted box. The sun painted the sky with golden hues, a vivid contrast to the quiet street where I grew up. It was the kind of quiet that was interrupted only by the chirping of birds and the occasional bark of a dog. But for as long as I could remember, there was also the soft, rhythmic thudding of the old man's shoes against the pavement. Nobody knew his name. His presence was as much a part of our street as the elm trees that lined it. Every day he wandered around, his eyes lost in some ancient memory, and his dingy blue coat billowing behind him like a dark shadow. One particular sunny day, I decided to wear my vibrant red dress. It had been a gift from my grandmother, and with its intricate lacework and swirling patterns made me feel like a Victorian princess. As I strolled, lost in my daydreams, I heard the familiar thud of the old man's steps. I looked up, half expecting him to pass by, but instead he stopped in front of me. His eyes, usually so distant, focused on me with an unsettling clarity. Silently, he extended a hand, offering a manila-coloured box. I hesitated, glancing around, but the street was as empty as always. Slowly, curious yet cautious, I accepted the box. The weight was negligible, but the box was cool to the touch. The lid opened with a soft creak to reveal a magnificent diorama. It was a perfect miniature replica of our street. Every house, every tree, even the smallest pebble on the road. The artistry left me in awe. But my admiration turned to horror when I spotted two tiny figures at the centre. There I was, in my vibrant red dress, standing opposite the old man. As I watched, the miniature old man handed the miniature me another box. My heart raced. Was this some kind of twisted joke? I looked up, questions flooding my mind, but the old man was already walking away, his coat billowing behind him. Terrified, I ran home. I placed the box on my study table, its intricate details pulling me in despite my fears. Hours seemed to pass as I watched the tiny version of myself open the box handed by the miniature old man. To my shock, inside that box was another, even smaller replica of our street, with even smaller versions of us, and within that another and another in an endless recursive loop. Night fell, but the fear kept me awake. The quiet of my room was disturbed by the faintest sounds, the minuscule footsteps, the rustling of the trees, and an eerie silence enveloping it all. I decided to investigate the first miniature world once again. Leaning in, I squinted at the smallest replica I could discern. This time, the scene was different. The miniature me looked terrified, and the old man's figure was moving closer. The scene in the next smaller replica was even more terrifying. The old man held the miniature me by the arm, and in the next tinier scene, he was dragging her away. A cold realization dawned upon me. Each replica wasn't a repetition, but a continuation. Each box was predicting the next event. Panicking, I shut the box and wrapped it in a cloth. I needed to get rid of it. But as I reached for my coat, the soft thudding sound echoed in my ears. No longer distant, it was right outside my window. Gathering every ounce of courage, I peeked out. The old man stood there, his coat no longer billowing but settled around him, his eyes fixed on my window. The streetlight gave his face a ghostly pallor, his expression inscrutable. In a rush, I grabbed the box and darted out of the back door. If the box was predicting my future, then perhaps destroying it would change my fate. The nearby woods seemed like the perfect place to bury it. With every step, I heard his following. The soft thud of his shoes got louder and more persistent. The woods welcomed me with a chilling embrace. Finding a secluded spot, I started digging frantically with my hands. Finally, the box was in the ground. The sound of footsteps had stopped, replaced by the whispering of the trees and the distant hoot of an owl. Just as I began to breathe a sigh of relief, a cold hand clasped over my mouth. I turned to face the old man, his eyes no longer distant but filled with a malevolent gleam. He didn't speak. He just held out another manila-coloured box. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was not a miniature replica of the street or the woods, but of my room. There, lying on the bed, was me, peacefully asleep, untouched by the horrors of the outside world. As the silence of the woods deepened, I realized that the real horror wasn't in the endless boxes or even the old man. It was in the possibility that our realities might just be layers within someone else's nightmare.
Shadows in the glass. Evelyn, a renowned beauty influencer, was always on the hunt for unique props to enhance her backdrop. Her videos, famous for their content, were equally popular for their exquisite settings. Antique shops were her treasure trove, and on a cloudy afternoon, she stumbled upon a particularly enigmatic store nestled in an old part of the city. Amongst the array of dusty items, a large ornate mirror stood out. Its gilded edges were intricate, and the surface, despite the thick layer of dust, reflected with peculiar clarity. What truly captured Evelyn's interest was how it reflected not her current self, but a younger, more innocent version. A version from a time before the stress of online fame, the version she missed deeply. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with deep-set eyes, watched as Evelyn's face lit up. When asked about the mirror's price, he hesitated before mumbling, "For you, on the house." Evelyn, thrilled, didn't question the unexpected generosity. That evening, the mirror took pride of place in her recording studio. She looked into it, mesmerized by her younger reflection. Her youthful eyes stared back, full of hopes and dreams. For hours she sat, losing herself in the past. The next morning, Evelyn felt unusually tired. Her skin felt stretched, wrinkles seemed deeper, and her eyes droopy. Assuming it was fatigue from her hectic schedule, she brushed it off. Turning on her camera, she sat down to record. Her eyes drifted to the mirror, and she found solace in her youthful reflection. Comments on her video that day were filled with concern. "Evelyn, are you okay? You look so tired lately. Has fame aged you overnight?" Concerned, she looked into her regular mirror, gasping at the noticeable changes. Her face had aged, the skin was less firm, and her eyes had lost their sparkle. Panic set in. Had her beauty products failed? Was this premature aging? Her career was built on her appearance, and this sudden transformation was catastrophic. By nightfall, her gaze returned to the vintage mirror. Her youthful reflection seemed to smirk, mocking her current state. Engulfed in anger and desperation, she shouted, "What have you done to me?" Suddenly, the room grew colder. The reflection's lips moved, its voice a haunting whisper. "The price of nostalgia is steep. You longed for youth, and now it's yours to keep." Evelyn realized the horror of her situation. Every time she'd looked into the mirror, seeking comfort in her past, she had aged, while her reflection remained untouched by time. Desperate, she decided to return the mirror to the antique store. But by morning, the store had vanished, leaving behind an empty lot as if it had never existed. Days turned into weeks, and Evelyn's aging accelerated. Her followers watched in shock as the once vibrant beauty influencer transformed before their eyes. She tried to shield herself from the mirror, covering it with thick drapes, but its allure was overpowering. One evening, consumed by a mix of fear and longing, she pulled away the curtains. Her reflection, still in its youthful prime, seemed more alive than ever. But Evelyn, now looking decades older, was a mere shadow of her former self. Tears streamed down her wrinkled face as she pleaded, "Give me back my life." The reflection smiled, "A life for a life." It stepped out of the mirror, forcing Evelyn into its glassy prison. The room echoed with the younger Evelyn's triumphant laughter. The mirror's curse wasn't done. Now inside the glass, the older Evelyn watched in horror as her real-world counterpart, the younger reflection, took over her life. It reveled in the fame, basking in the admiration of Evelyn's followers, while the real Evelyn was but a shadow trapped in the glass. Weeks passed, and the imposter's arrogance grew. It loved its newfound freedom but hated the mirror, the only evidence of its unnatural existence. In a fit of rage, it shattered the mirror, thinking it would sever the tie. But with the shattering of the glass, both worlds collapsed. The imposter vanished into thin air, and the trapped, aged Evelyn was released. But the damage was irreversible. The broken shards reflected fragments of her youth, now forever lost, the beauty world mourned the rapid decline of their star. Evelyn, once a beacon of youth and beauty, had become a cautionary tale. Years later, a young influencer stumbled upon a curious antique store. Among the treasures, she found a stunning, fragmented mirror. As she pieced it together, she caught a glimpse of a much younger version of herself, and the cycle began anew. The videographer's chronicle. I always considered myself a filmmaker. While other kids played sports or hung out at the mall, I was buried deep within the realms of imagery and motion. My camera, a shining relic from the 2000s, was my sanctuary. My cluttered bedroom, its walls plastered with movie posters, its floors covered in tripods, lenses, and memory cards, was a testament to all the films never made, each item holding the promise of a story yet to be told. The peculiar incidents began last month. Kids at school, ones I'd known since childhood, began to act strangely. At first, I thought it was some new teen fad, the paleness of their eyes, the hollow expressions, the monotone voices. But then, it became obvious. They were changing, becoming lifeless. I knew I had to capture it. The world had to see this, the transformation from vibrant beings to shadowed husks. Driven by an irresistible impulse, I lured 4 of them into my room. Greg, a former soccer star, Sarah, the valedictorian, Luke, who played the drums, and Lila, the prom queen. The camera was set up in the corner of my room, its lens capturing every inch of space, every flicker of movement. Day by day, I documented their transformation. Their skin grew pallid, their movements jerky and disjointed. Their once sparkling eyes now mirrored an abyss. As the days wore on, the 4 of them grew more monstrous. Their voices morphed into disturbing harmonies, their movements synced in an eerie ballet of coordination. The video feed captured it all, a living testament to humanity's downfall. I often wondered if I was doing the right thing, keeping them there. But I rationalized it. The world had to see. Weeks in, I began the arduous task of editing the footage. With each passing clip, I felt a growing sense of unease. The footage showed them dancing, murmuring unintelligible incantations, their fingers twitching in grotesque gestures. And then, as I played back one particular segment, my blood ran cold. There it was, a 5th shadow. A shadow that wasn't mine. I replayed the clip, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to rationalize it, maybe it was just a trick of the light. But no. The shadow had form, substance. As I looked closer, I noticed its movements were deliberate. It lurked behind them, always just out of frame, a dark silhouette with long, spindly fingers. Panic set in. I scoured through hours of footage, searching for more signs of the shadow. And there it was, in clip after clip, always lurking, always watching. I wondered if it had something to do with their transformation, this mysterious 5th entity. Was it the cause? Or merely an observer? With trembling fingers, I opened a live feed to the camera in my room. The 4 of them stood in a circle, chanting in their ghastly harmony. And behind them, clear as day, was the shadow, stretching tall and dark, its fingers reaching towards them. I took a deep breath and entered the room. As I stepped in, the chanting grew louder, and their movements more frenetic. The shadow turned to face me, its presence felt like a cold wind. "Who are you?" I whispered, the camera still recording. In response, the room grew colder, and a voice, more like a whisper of the wind, replied, "The chronicler." "The what?" "I document, just as you do. But while you capture moments, I capture souls. They are mine now." I stumbled back, gripping my camera for comfort. "What do you want with them?" The shadow grew larger, its form less defined. "I don't want them. I already have them. It's you I'm interested in." "Why?" I stammered. "Because you're a storyteller, just like me." Suddenly, I realized the true horror. The shadow wasn't here because of them, it was here because of me. My obsession with documenting, with capturing the truth, had lured this entity to my doorstep. "I won't let you take them," I yelled, the courage rising within me. The room grew even colder, the lights flickering. The shadow loomed closer. "You have no choice." In a final act of desperation, I turned my camera to face the shadow, pressing record. The room was filled with a blinding light. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact. But when I opened them, the room was empty. The kids, the shadow, all gone. My camera lay on the floor, its lens shattered. To this day, I don't know what truly happened. I've tried to replay the footage, but it's all corrupted, a sea of static and white noise. But sometimes, late at night, I hear faint whispers, and I can't shake the feeling that somewhere, in a realm I can't see, the shadow is still watching, still chronicling. Pandora's toy box. James was used to hiding. Whether it was in the back of the classroom, behind the bleachers, or under his bed, he knew all the nooks and crannies of his life. Bullying was a routine for him. Kevin, Lily, and Mark, the trinity of terror at James' school, made sure of that. One evening, when James was under his bed retrieving a lost sock, his fingers brushed against an unfamiliar object. Pulling it out, he found a dusty, old wooden box. It was locked, but a curious insignia, a swirl surrounded by stars, was etched onto the top. The box felt heavy in his hand, pulsating with an ancient energy. Finding the key wasn't hard. It was taped to the bottom of the box. Turning the key in the lock, the lid creaked open, revealing 3 toys, intricately crafted, resembling his bullies, Kevin the bear, Lily the doll, and Mark the soldier. Laughing, James imagined how mortifying it would be for the trio to know that they had been immortalized as toys. He decided to take out some of his frustration on the mini-bullies. He twisted Kevin the bear's arm, imagining the bully's discomfort. To James' astonishment, the toy's arm broke off easily, and he quickly placed it back into the box, feeling a pang of guilt. The next day at school, the atmosphere was tense. Rumors were circulating that Kevin had been in a terrible accident. His arm was crushed when he fell from his bike, landing right under a car. The bones shattered, rendering it useless. James felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. Was it merely a coincidence? He wondered. He thought about the toy box but quickly dismissed the notion. Days later, a bout of anger had James reopening the box. This time, he took out Lily the doll. Remembering her cruel laughter when he tripped in the hallway, he impulsively cut off her golden locks. The following day, news spread that Lily's hair had been caught in a fan at her home, tearing out a significant chunk, leaving her nearly bald. Terrified, James finally connected the dots. The toy box was no ordinary box. It had power, a terrible, malevolent power. He wanted to rid himself of it but was also tempted. Mark had been particularly nasty lately, humiliating James in front of his crush. One fateful evening, anger got the best of him. Taking out Mark the soldier, James broke both its legs. At school, Mark never showed up. Word got around that he had been in an accident, both of his legs crushed beyond repair. The weight of his actions bore down on James. He had maimed his bullies. They had been cruel, but they didn't deserve this fate. He decided he would bury the toy box, deep in the woods behind his house. By evening, he was out with a shovel, and after what felt like hours, he buried it, hoping to keep its dark power at bay. Weeks turned into months, and life moved on. James began to sleep better, the memories of the toy box slowly fading. But one evening, something felt amiss. As he lay in bed, a familiar weight pressed on his chest, the weight of guilt, of deeds done in anger. He peeked under his bed, and to his horror, the toy box was back. Frantic, James opened the box. Inside, there wasn't 3, but 4 toys. The newest addition was a toy resembling him. He noticed the others looked worn out, especially Mark the soldier, whose broken legs now ominously bore the signs of rot. In a panic, James grabbed the toy version of himself and noticed that its tiny arms were bruised, just like his own, remnants of his last encounter with Kevin before the accident. Tears in his eyes, he understood. The box wasn't just about revenge, it was about balance. For every harm he caused with the toys, the same would happen to him. That night, he dreamt of the toy box. In his dream, it opened on its own. From it, a spectral child emerged. This was Pandora, the box's original owner, who had once been bullied too. "You're not the first," she whispered, her eyes hollow with sadness. "But you can be the last." Balance the scales. James woke up determined. He took the box to his school and showed it to his teacher, narrating everything. She listened, disbelief turning to concern. The school rallied around James. Kevin, Lily, and Mark, now recovering, came forward, expressing remorse for their actions. Together, they decided to bury the toy box, this time encasing it in cement and placing it in the school's courtyard as a monument, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked anger and the need for reconciliation. As the years passed, James would often sit by the monument, reflecting on the past. The lessons he learned were hard and terrifying, but they had transformed not just him, but the entire community. He hoped Pandora's spirit had found peace, knowing her toy box was now a symbol of unity rather than vengeance.
Thank you for watching, and remember, the darkness awaits. Until our paths cross again, stay fearful and stay subscribed.